7:40, Sean Leslie in for John McComb. Glad to have you with us on this Wednesday morning. Nice morning shaping up. Few clouds out there. Want to tell you about this story. It was in the Huffington Post about a guy. They don't name the guy. He wants to keep his name secret. He was up for a job with TD Bank, with a subsidiary of TD Bank. And they tentatively said, yes, you've got the job, about a $52,000 per year job in the insurance side of the business, pending a criminal record check and a credit check. Well, I guess they did the credit check, found some problems with this guy's credit, and he doesn't get the job. They withdraw the offer. So HuffPost wrote about this and found out this is perfectly legal. In fact, it is commonplace in the financial services industry. It's a practice that started in the United States. It's come to Canada, and in fact, it's moving beyond the financial services industry. More and more companies are doing credit checks on prospective employees. Do you think that's right? I'd love to hear from you. We'll open up the phone lines in a few moments. You can also email me at sleslie@cknw.com. Welcome to the program, Elizabeth Reed, employment and human rights lawyer with Boughton Law. Boughton Law is CKNW's new on-air legal analyst for 2015, helping us to discuss some of the big stories of the day. Good morning, Elizabeth. How are you?
Good morning, Sean. I'm very well, thank you.
Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. I did not know that this was okay, that a potential employer could check your credit and use that to determine if you'd make a good employee. But apparently it is, Elizabeth.
Well, I don't think you're alone in being surprised there. Employers certainly can perform credit checks, and they can use those to make hiring decisions.
Why? What's the argument there? Is it that if I have bad credit, I'm a bad person?
That's essentially the kind of analysis that they're drawing. I think that's an excellent question. Why are we asking for credit checks? I mean, they weren't designed for anything other than assessing, your credit history and determining whether, someone should lend you some money. But we're treating it as some kind of proxy for trustworthiness. Yeah,
exactly. Well, I guess the assumption or the implication, Elizabeth, is that, well, if you've got a bad credit rating, that might make you more liable to do some hanky-panky on the job, maybe embezzle funds or commit fraud or something like that.
That's exactly the assumption that they're making. And when we look at how a credit check is kind of used and the fact that can change over time, and you could have a person come in who has perfect credit when you hire them, but then they get into all kinds of trouble later, it makes you wonder if that really is the kind of best proxy for, is this person a trustworthy employee or going to be a trustworthy employee? So
could this happen here in British Columbia? The case I mentioned is, I believe, out of Toronto. Could that happen in BC?
It definitely could. There is a bit of a caveat. Under British Columbia privacy legislation, there is a reasonableness requirement. So essentially, you can only ask for a credit check if that would be reasonable to assess that particular applicant's suitability. And so that's going to depend a little bit on the role that this person is going to be asked to play and the timing of the request. So you might see a senior bank manager, that might be justifiable. If you've got a barista who's sort of working the day shift, they're not doing any cashing in or cashing out, and they're supervised through their entire shift, that's probably not reasonable.
Well, that's funny you mentioned barista because apparently applicants to companies like Tim Hortons have also reported being asked to submit a credit check. And just reading from this story in the Huffington Post, Mark's Work Warehouse was doing it. And then you mentioned the privacy angle, Elizabeth, because apparently back in 2010, there was a ruling from the Alberta Privacy Commissioner that was not reasonable for Mark's Work Warehouse to ask that question. And so they've stopped doing it. So it sounds like this area is maybe a little bit in flux right now.
I think that's exactly right. And of course, it's going to depend on all of the factors. So another thing that comes into play is when are you asking for this credit check? Are you asking that from all applicants just as soon as they put their resumes in? Or are you waiting to look at just those that you're seriously considering hiring?
There are, reasonable grounds to reject applicants, but are there not rules against, discriminating based on age, for instance, Elizabeth?
Yes, there certainly are rules about age discrimination, and that can come up when you're asking for a credit check because your birth date will be included on the credit check. So one thing I like to advise employers, if you're going to do these kinds of checks, then you want to make sure that you sort of insulate the decision maker from that information. So you would basically just have somebody review the credit check, tell the person who's actually doing the hiring, yes, they passed or no, they didn't, so that the decision maker can't later be accused of age discrimination.
Yeah, because I wonder. Okay, you could say, well, okay, we didn't hire you because of your credit rating, but really, it's because you're too old for us.
Exactly, and that's the kind of claim that you want to avoid for sure.
Now, I suspect a lot of people don't even know what their credit ratings are at this point, Elizabeth. You can find out, though, can't you? You can phone kind of the major credit rating agencies in Canada?
Yes, my understanding is that you basically get kind of one free check per year.
Right, that's what it is. And it's I think Equifax is at least one of them. But what was interesting is there was one man cited in this story who said, I had one bad entry on my credit record 6 years ago, and that cost me a job opportunity 6 years ago, Elizabeth.
Yeah, that surprises me too. You'd think they'd give him a pass if it was that long ago and he'd sort of showed that he'd rehabilitated himself.
Usually you can. Usually you can start building up your credit rating. We'll take a quick break here. Our guest is Elizabeth Reed, employment and human rights lawyer with Boughton Law. What do you think? Should a bad credit rating disqualify you from a job? I'd love to hear from you at 604-280-9898. Has it ever happened to you? Star 9898 on your cell phone. You can email me at sleslie@cknw.com or tweet me at SeanLeslie980. Back in a flash here on CKNW News Talk 980. Thank you, Mark. Not a bad morning out there. 8 degrees now outside CKNW. Amelia sends me an email saying, good morning, a bit of humor. Too bad they didn't check Mike Duffy's credit rating before they made him a senator, and some of the MPs as well. I don't think they should be able to check a prospective employee's credit rating, as many credit ratings can be erroneous. Thank you, Amelia. You can send me an email at sleslie@cknw.com. We're speaking with Elizabeth Reed, employment and human rights lawyer with Boughton Law, our on-air legal analyst here at CKNW. Elizabeth, I won't keep you too much longer, but what is your best advice around this now that people do know about this, that your credit rating can be a factor in employment, not just in the financial services industry, but other sectors as well? What should candidates be aware of? What should employers be aware of?
Well, I think for candidates, of course, a key thing then is going to be making sure that your credit history is accurate and up to date. And keeping in mind, you need to make sure that you check both of the major credit reporting agencies, because sometimes your credit score will be slightly different with each one, depending on where they've drawn their information from. So make sure that credit history is accurate and dispute anything that you see on there that just isn't right, to make sure that you have the best credit score going in. And I think applicants can also feel free, to ask the employer, what are you going to be using this information for, and who's going to have access to that information, and for what purposes?
I think those are great questions to ask, and I wonder if our own privacy commissioner might weigh in at some point on this. Elizabeth, great advice. Great to talk with you. Thank you so much this morning.
Oh, my pleasure. Pleasure to be on the show. That
is Elizabeth Reed, employment and human rights lawyer with Boughton Law, our on-air legal analyst here at CKNW. What do you think? Send me an email at sleslie@cknw.com.